Hey wildlings, we're just going to jump straight into it today because I'm not even quite sure how to introduce this video. But if you're ready for another story time type of video, then kick back and relax. And don't forget, if you're wanting a reading from me or any of my spirit puppet offerings, don't forget to go over to the Etsy shop that is listed in the links below, and let's get into it. So a couple of weeks ago, I had planned to do a ritual around the time of the full moon, and I wanted to focus this ritual on ancestral work specifically, and specifically working with the Northern Gate. And what we mean by the Northern Gate in witchcraft is we mean the north direction. So when we work in witchcraft, not everyone works this way, but often we will create and cast a circle with the 4 points of the 4 directions, north, east, south and west, and we can work specifically with one of those directions, or we will call them in as forms of protection as we cast our circles. And so for this ritual specifically, I called in the 4 directions, but I was wanting to focus my workings on going into the North Gate and specifically working with the element of earth and what else can also be found within the North Gate. And so when we work with the northern direction, this is also the realm of our ancestors, because it is the realm of earth. So it is the realm of things that are on this earthly plane and that have lived and experienced this earthly plane. So it's a good direction to work with if you're wanting to do work regarding mediumship and spirit work, so speaking to the dead or speaking to ancestors of your own lineage, so whether communicating for other people or communicating for your own ancestral family line. And then obviously there is also an overlap there as well with the realm of the Fae, with the northern direction being the realm of earth. So my intention for the ritual was to actually go into it in order to break any ancestral bonds that might be running through my family regarding prosperity. And this idea of scarcity, frequency, or fear of being without, fear of lack, those types of themes. I felt like something was rising within me in the weeks leading up to it, and I knew that I wanted to directly make a ritual regarding ancestral release and clearing any karma that might be negatively associated with my family line from ancestral experiences. So that is why I specifically went into the ritual with the intention of influencing the prosperity that was running through my family and going back and addressing any fracturing that might have occurred further back in previous storylines. So one thing that I was not expecting when I was doing this work, I very much thought I was just going into it very clearly with the intention of connecting with some ancestors who might have experienced things like extreme poverty, famine, loss, things like that in previous lifetimes, where those fractured and grief-stricken, unhealed parts may have passed through the family line. So that was my intention. But when I actually got into the Northern Gate, and this was very much a very externalized ritual, so it wasn't just vision questing, there was a whole ritual that I was actually conducting in the physical space as well. It was very ceremonial. So the energy was very potent, and I was taken back to this very specific scene that sort of caught me off guard, because you have to understand I was going into this with the intention specifically to work with my ancestors and didn't really expect anything else when I was going in there. But I was taken to this scene where there was a group of what seemed like men sort of in what looked to be the large sort of pine forests of the Pacific Northwest, you know, those sort of, that area of coastline of America where there's sort of, I think it's Oregon, Washington, it was those kinds of forests, right? The big tall pine trees with the ferns, and it was very sort of damp and very almost like an Atlantic rainforest like we would get here in the UK, except here in the UK we didn't necessarily have such huge swathes of pine. They were more associated in Scotland, but this was very much pine forest. This was very much where the setting was. And I was just watching the scene unfold, and I saw this group of men who were basically trying to cut down this huge tree. I mean, it almost looked like a redwood, I guess. So they were all working towards cutting down this redwood tree, and as I was an observer to what was happening as the scene was unfolding, I saw this spirit appear that was very large, and I'll actually insert a picture of what it was that I saw, because I understood it to be a leshy. So for those of you that don't know what a leshy is a type of spirit that is specifically attached to areas of woodland and forest in a protective manner. So they're very much a sort of guardian of place, a guardian spirit that cares for the wildlife that is within that woodland or forest. We have to think back to times when our ancestors were around, because obviously now, I mean, here in the UK, we basically have no woodland left at all. We have about 3% woodland cover, when we used to be a woodland nation through and through, and now we have barely anything left. But when you go back to these times of our ancestors, these forests, and America is still quite lucky, I guess, to have large areas of wooded places that are still a bit wild, but the energies there would have been so much stronger for our ancestors, because there was just so much more there, right? It hadn't been deforested as much, it hadn't been interfered with as much, and so they lived very closely to the land, was what they depended on for survival. And as I saw them cut down this tree, which I assumed they were using the wood in an appropriate manner, they were cutting down the trees to build something specifically, but they were doing it in a way that wasn't giving honor to the spirits of the land. So when I actually was watching it, it seemed like these men were foreign settlers. So when obviously people invaded the US, and committed all those atrocities to the native indigenous people of the USA, sorry, of America, because it wasn't called the USA obviously when that happened, forgive my ignorance. It very much seemed like they were white settlers that had come in and clearly did not have the same relationship with the land that the native indigenous people did at that time. Obviously, we know that the native indigenous people of America were very shamanically driven. They were associated with honoring the land and animism and seeing spirit in all of the landscape and all of the elements of the landscape. But these weren't those types of people. This was a group of invaders, essentially. And what I saw was that this leshy, who I don't know how to refer to them, the white person, the invaders, the settlers, however you want to refer to them, what I saw was that the leshy was clearly enraged by this. So obviously this is a protective nature spirit that is protective of that particular piece of land, that particular forest, that particular space, wherever it was. And the settlers had come in and obviously cut down this tree without leaving any honourings, without leaving any offerings or any sort of thanks or recognition, and just simply going in there and taking what they wanted and what they needed. And this, from what I could see, really aggravated and enraged the leshy that was associated with that spirit of place. Obviously, if there had been indigenous communities that were living in that land before, they likely had these very beautifully reciprocal relationships with the land, right, where they gave thanks to everything that they took. They lived in harmony and in peace with the land. The settlers that went over with a very different culture clearly didn't move through the landscape this way, and so something clearly happened in this part of my family line where a nature spirit specifically was enraged by an action of my ancestors. I obviously wasn't expecting this, because I just thought I was going in and I was going to see some sort of storylines of ancestors in the past that have experienced extreme poverty and famine and things like that. So I was kind of taken off guard, and I had this moment in the ritual where I was very much in the vision and I was experiencing it all happening before me, and then I was brought very much back to the room, and this leshy entity was very much there in the ritual space, almost on the edges of the circle that I had cast. So that was making me aware that although this may have happened generations and generations and generations ago, that there was still some sort of a balance that needed to be addressed, that needed to be recovered and needed to be healed. So I became very much aware that there had been some sort of misfortune a curse, if you will, that had been placed upon my lineage from a enraged nature spirit. And when we say curse, you know, movies and media and things have very much made the idea of a curse seem like some sort of wicked sorceress magic that seems very removed from the human experience. Don't get me wrong, there's definitely branches of magic that you could go down if you were interested in committing those kinds of things. However, be careful what you play with, is all I'd say. But a curse actually means to wither away and die. So if you actually look at, I can't remember which language it is, but if you look back in where curse is actually rooted, the word curse, it actually means to wither away and die. So you can curse a disease, you can curse a tumour, you're basically directing negative energy at something in order to make it less of. And so I'm saying curse because I don't really have a better term for what it was that I was kind of becoming privy to, but it was this curse that was sort of placed, or an ill wish, if you will, that was placed on the generations that followed of these men, I guess, and then specifically whoever was my ancestor that was in the party. That misfortune and scarcity befall them, because obviously in the act, the ancestor was disrespectfully removing something and taking something for their own in an act of greed, right? And so nature spirits are very, very powerful, and I have never experienced anything negative with a nature spirit. And even this experience was not negative, because although it's something that happened in the past, obviously it's not something that I've directly done, but it was something that I became privy to, I guess, because of the intensity of the work that I do with nature spirits. So it was really fascinating. But I was just being made aware that there was this imbalance that needed to be readdressed. And obviously with the ancestors taking something out of greed, the nature spirit was enraged, and so it cast a curse on the generations that followed in order to have any sort of greedy intentions of having more or abundance or prosperity, that would also be cursed and withered away and die. And so I imagine for a few generations to follow from that moment, they experienced quite a bit of misfortune and difficulties and blockages in being able to just live a happy and abundant and steady life. And then obviously as generations come and go, karma changes, because each generation and each individual born into a family puts in their own karma, whether that be positive or negative to the family line. And so I feel like over the generations, these things obviously improved somewhat. I actually recently became aware that my great grandfather married my great grandmother, and she was a member of the Blackfeet indigenous community over in America. And my grandfather, my great grandfather, he was descended from the white settlers. So later on in the family story, if you will, I very much think that there was this moment of healing that probably occurred when these two branches of DNA joined in my ancestral story, and a great healing would have taken place from it. You know, this merging of these two opposing families, I guess, if you will. So we can very much heal what has happened in the past by our actions in the here and the now. And so I knew that some healing had taken place and things had improved for this curse that had or this misfortune that had maybe aligned itself with my family from this action that happened. But by me becoming aware of it in that moment, it meant that I needed to do my part now, by being given that knowledge and that insight, to address the balance in my own way energetically. So what I did was, because I wasn't really sure what to do, because when it happened I wasn't expecting it. Like I said, it wasn't what I'd intended to go into the work for. But what I decided to do was, as I was holding the vision, I projected myself more strongly into the scene. And as I stepped foot into the scene, I entered the space that the leshy was in, and I went to the tree where it had been cut down by my ancestor, and the leshy was there, stood next to me, and I took out of my travelling satchel offerings which I placed upon the scar of the stump of the tree that had been felled, and I knelt down beside it. I sent it my loving gratitude, my loving energy. I vocalized a thanks for the materials that it offered in order to ensure the safety of my family, of the people that had cut down the tree. And I just sat with it for a few moments, and I directed all of that appreciation and all of that gratitude to that piece of the land that had been harmed and had been scarred by my ancestors. And that was enough. Like I said, I was kind of just doing it on the fly. I wasn't really, I didn't have a handbook for what to do. I very much just went intuitively with what I thought was right. And I just changed the scene. And this is something that I do when I do regression to find points of fracturing in my own story or in my ancestors' story, is you go back to a specific scene and you change the scene, you change how it happened, you change the story, right? And it's an energetic work, but the energy is being used through the forms of archetypes and symbols, right? So we're energetically changing the thread, if you will, but we're doing it through vision and through the medium of imagery, symbols, and archetypes. So after I had done this, I turned and looked at the leshy, and we looked at each other, and we both bowed our heads in acknowledgement, and I very much felt the energy just clear. So as I said, it's not that I felt like this curse had been placed and it was being extremely detrimental to me hundreds and hundreds of years into the future. I am quite certain that some misfortune would have befallen specifically the person that carried out that specific act, and then probably a few generations after suffered a little bit. But I just found it fascinating because I had gone into the Northern Gate obviously to do ancestral work, and that just brought to my awareness that not only can we do incredible amounts of healing in the Northern Gate associated with the struggles that our ancestors have had, so that they do not create blockages here in this lifetime and in our own storylines, so we're not repeating patterns of our ancestors. And you know, I'm talking about going back a few hundred years ago, but we can literally do ancestral work from the individual family relatives that we have had living with us in this lifetime. So people that have passed in this lifetime, we can use the Northern Gate to communicate with them. As I said, it's good for mediumship as well as a direct channel, a gateway of energy to that access point of work. So if there's specific healing that you're wanting to take place between you and a family member that might have passed where you didn't end on good terms, or if you are wanting to address things that you didn't get to address when that person was alive, things like that, that's the type of witchcraft that you can do with this access point. But it was just a fascinating insight to me that obviously the Northern Gate is Earth, so it is also the realm of the Fae. It's the realm of the animal spirits and of the plant spirits and of all the other kinds of nature spirits that we have. And then it's the realm of us and our family and our storyline, because we are of the earth. We are as much tied to the earth as the nature spirits are. We are as much a part of the cycle of life and the earth as much as we try to pull away from it as humans and place ourselves in high-rise buildings of concrete and disconnected from nature. You know, we like to think that we're above it, but we're very much a part of it and an aspect of it as a whole. So of course it makes sense that when we're directing those types of work, that those two elements would be together in this specific direction. So I hope I articulated this well, because I've been wanting to talk about it, but it's such a difficult thing to try and like put into words. I thought about doing a story time like the Hedge Witch Diary series, but it just felt like, because it wasn't a specific storyline or spirit that I was intentionally going in to work with, or an experience that kind of just happened as a one-on-one interaction with a specific spirit. Obviously there was the leshy, but it just felt like there was so many more other elements that I wanted to try and like weave in to talk about. So I do hope that I articulated it okay, because it's a difficult concept to try and put into words, as I say with all of my videos. So thank you for bearing with me and giving me space to just chatter away and try and put words to these experiences that happen. But yeah, I hope it's given you some insight, maybe a new perspective on working with the North Direction and witchcraft. I hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, let me know if this is kind of work that you've done before or how you experience working with the directions in witchcraft. As I said, if you're wanting to book a reading with me, then don't forget to head over to my Etsy shop. I also have all my spirit poppet offerings on there as well. I've just finished 2 commissioned pieces and I'm in the process of another one, so I still have a few spirit puppet commissions open too, if that's something that you're interested in. But if that's where we leave it, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I hope I will see you in my next video, wildlings. Mwah. Bye.